And welcome back to the CTMU. Last time we left off, adjust this microphone a little bit. Perfect, okay. Last time we left off on this paragraph right here. Wait, oh, nope, one page back. This paragraph, when we're getting into sentential logic, which I'll comment on in just a moment. But first, we'll just go ahead and read this. We may have read this, I don't think so. But if so, it'll be just recap, which is fine. For example, take the sentential tautology X or not X. Applied to perception, this means that when something is seen or observed, it is not seen in conjunction with its absence. If it were, then two contradictory perceptions would coincide, resulting in a splitting off of perceptual realities. In effect, either the consciousness of the perceiver would split into two separate cognitive realities in a case of chain reactive dissociation, or the perceiver would physically split along with physical reality. That kind of brings to mind many worlds theorism. Anyhow, when X or not X is composed with other tautologies or itself by substitution, the stakes are exactly the same. Any violation of the compound tautology would split perceptual and cognitive reality with disastrous implications for its integrity. So sentential logic seems to extend that to tautology. And tautology, like we kind of went over, is essentially kind of diminutively regarded as saying the same thing twice. Although I have more respect for it personally. It's basically the opposite of a contradiction. And Chris seems to extend like modus ponens, inferential logic to tautology, which I think is kind of fair because modus ponens is like if P then Q, P therefore Q, which seems tautological, but generally a lot of people will kind of combat me on that in some of the group chats I've been around, because it's kind of inferential. But if Q in that proposition is, necessitatively contained by P, then it kind of does make sense for that kind of inferential logic, which is kind of present in a lot of sentential logic. A lot of it just amounts to modus ponens, but yeah, to continue on after that. After its tautological nature, the first thing to note about sentential logic in the context of reality theory is that, against the spirit in which it was founded, it does, after all, represent the rules of mental processes, of cognition and perception, which would seem to endow it with a mental character from the start. As a basic functional inadequacy, it seems to require an external logician to mentally read, understand, and apply it. On the other hand, nature or cognitive perceptual reality requires no external logician to apply the rules of logic. Therefore, the proposed tautology preserving principles of reality theory should put mind back into the mix in an explicit, theoretically tractable way, effectively endowing logic with a self-processing capability. So no need for an extrinsic mind. This, after all, is exactly what it possesses in its natural manifestation, reality at large, and is an essential dimension, that's odd, of the closure property without which truth is insupportable. That is, reality must be able to recognize itself and impart this ability to its components as a condition of their existence and interaction. All right. Having explained the main technical issues in reality theory, we may now cut to the chase. The way to build a theory of reality is to identify the properties that it must unconditionally possess in order to exist, and then bring the theory into existence by defining it to possess these properties without introducing merely contingent properties that, if taken as general, could impair its descriptive relationship with the real universe. Those can come later and will naturally be subject to empirical confirmation. In other words, the means by which the theory is constructed must be rational and tautological, while those by which it is subsequently refined may be empirical. Since we want our theory to be inclusive enough, exclusive enough, and consistent enough to do the job of describing reality, these properties will certainly include comprehensiveness, less thorough but also less undecidable than completeness, closure, and consistency. To these properties, the three C's, we shall assign three principles that are basically tautological in form. That way, adjoining them to logic-based reality theory will preserve the tautology property of logic, rationally precluding uncertainty by the same means of logic itself. A theory of reality constructed in this manner is called a supertautology. Super. Okay. And we will remind ourselves of which of these correspond to which of these, but this is going to introduce a few key ideas of the CTMU, and he will talk about them a little bit here, and they will be flushed out a little bit later on, so I won't take too much time to look them up or anything like that. So, because our three principles correspond to the three C's, and because they all begin with the letter M, we might as well call them the three M's. M equals R, MAP, which didn't age well, and MU, respectively standing for the mind equals reality principle, the metaphysical ontology principle, and the multiplex unity principle. If any like materialist scientists were taking this seriously, they definitely soyed out when they saw this, but let's continue on. The M equals R principle, a tautological theoretical property that dissolves the distinction between theory and universe and thus identifies the real universe as a self-reifying theory, makes the syntax of this theory comprehensive by ensuring that nothing which can be cognitively or perceptually recognized as a part of reality is excluded for want of syntax. Okay, so the basic point there is that the mind has to be accounted for in reality. I don't think he's quite getting at the reality principle itself being mind, or perhaps rather that it has to be mental in nature to some extent, given that mind has to be accounted for by the reality principle. Therefore, even if you had some neutral monism, for instance, it would have to account for mind. It would have some mentalizing properties intrinsically that would, register as like how we conceive of mind later on. So M equals R corresponds with comprehensiveness, like he said. Okay, MAP, tautologically, and that's metaphysical ontology principle, tautologically renders this syntax closed or self-contained in the definitive, descriptive, and interpretational senses, and in conjunction with M equals R, renders the universe perfectly self-contained in the bargain. And MU, tautologically renders the syntax and the theory universe complex it describes coherent enough to ensure its own consistency. And that's multiplex unity principle. Interesting. Complex it describes coherent enough to ensure its own consistency. Thus, the C corresponding to MU actually splits into two C's, consistency and coherence, and we have four altogether. To each of these principles, we may add any worthwhile corollaries that present themselves. Okay, so MAP is also, closure, and then MU, consistency and coherency, which I guess are kind of different, but pretty similar. Since it is the lot of every reality theorist to use properties of reality to explain reality, and these properties are recursively defined, we will sometimes implicitly or explicitly refer to various properties in the descriptions of other properties. This precludes a neat series of cumulative definitions, which is possible in any case only by taking for granted the content and wherewithal of theorization. Unfortunately, one can take nothing for granted in reality theory. As we will see below, the recursive nature of the CTMU is unavoidable. Secondly, the CTMU is developed backwards with respect to the usual deductive theories of science and mathematics, by first peeling away constraints, and only then using the results to deduce facts about content. Most theories begin with axioms, hypotheses, and rules of inference, extract implications, logically or empirically, to test these implications, and then add or revise axioms, theorems, or hypotheses. The CTMU does the opposite, stripping away assumptions and rebuilding reality while adding no assumptions back in. Okay. Let's finish this page up. The following principles are presented in 3 stages. The first stage includes the reality principle, the principle of linguistic reducibility, and the principle of syndifionesis, which may be considered preliminary to MAP, M=R, and MU respectively. The order of presentation may differ slightly from that just given. The second stage consists of MAP, M=R, and MU themselves, while the third stage consists of several auxiliary principles that can be viewed as their consequences. All right. And yeah, MAP, or the self-closure, the self-containment of reality, I think he'll basically use syndifionesis as the primary argument to prove that. But, all right. The reality principle. Reality, i.e., the real universe, contains all and only that which is real. The reality concept is analytically self-contained. If there were something outside reality that were real enough to affect or influence reality, it would be inside reality. And this contradiction invalidates any supposition of an external reality up to observational or theoretical relevance. While this characterization of reality incorporates a circular definition of relevance, the circularity is essential to the reality concept and does not preclude a perceptual, observational, scientific basis. Indeed, we can refine the definition of reality as follows. Reality is the perceptual aggregate, including 1. All scientific observations that ever were and ever will be, and 2. The entire abstract and or cognitive explanatory infrastructure of perception, where the abstract is a syntactic generalization of the concrete standing for ideas, concepts, or cognitive structures distributing over physical instances which conform to them as content conforms to syntax. Okay. Okay, diagram 5. Unreality, reality, definition. Okay, let's revisit that. The unreal definition of reality. Well, that's the diagram. Okay. It should be noted that any definition amounts to a microscopic theory of the thing defined. The reality principle, which can be viewed as a general definition of reality, is a case in point. It can be viewed as the seed of a reality theory that we have now begun to build. In defining reality as self-contained, this microtheory endows itself with a simple kind of closure. It calls on nothing outside the definiendum in the course of defining it, and effectively forbids any future theoretical extension of this definition from doing so either. This becomes explicit in a related principle, the MAP. Okay, so I'm assuming these arrows from unreality are kind of trying to relay that if it were real, it would just be contained by reality, and that is the definition of reality. But I think it's a very good point. It's kind of syndiffionic in that if you have X and Y, you're presupposing they're both real, therefore they're both subsumed to the reality principle. So, but now, back to the cue. Thus far, we have learned that reality is self-contained. It is everywhere the same as itself. What about all of its internal distinctions? Okay. And yeah, so syndifionesis is also about explaining difference in sameness. I mean, that's basically, yeah, he'll say that right here. So
it's just like the relational medium, right?
Well, the principle, like syndifionic principle is a relational medium, but it's also getting at just explaining instances of like difference. Well, also it kind of seems to assert that difference in itself implies sameness via the relation, which I think is a very good point. Actually, I'm not sure if he's gonna get into that, but But yeah, it is essentially just a relational medium. Like by virtue of a relation, which is entailed by difference, or at least the observation of difference, there is sameness. So reality is a relation, and every relation is a syndiphionic relation, exhibiting syndipionesis or difference in sameness. Therefore, reality is a syndiphionic relation. Syndipionesis implies that any assertion to the effect that two things are different implies that they are reductively the same. Yeah, okay. So exactly that, which is, I think, a very good point. If their difference is real, then they both reduce to a common reality and are, to that extent, similar. Syndipionesis, the most general of all reductive principles, forms the basis of a new view of the relational structure of reality. The concept of syndipionesis can be captured by asserting that the expression and or existence of any difference relation entails a common medium and syntax, i.e., the rules of state and transformation characterizing the medium. It is from these rules that the relation derives its spatial and temporal characteristics as expressed within the medium. Thus, a syndiphionic relation consists of a difference relation embedded in a relational medium whose distributed rules of structure and evolution support its existence. Every syndiphionic relation has synetic and diffionic phases, respectively exhibiting synesis and diffionesis, sameness and difference, or distributivity and parametric locality, and displays two forms of containment, topological and descriptive. The medium is associated with the synetic phase, while the difference relation is associated with the diffionic phase. Because the rules of state and transformation of the medium are distributed over it, the medium is homogeneous, intrinsically possessing only relative extension by virtue of the difference relationships it contains. Because diffionic relands are related to their, I guess, things that are being related, are related to their common expressive medium and its distributive syntax in a way that combines aspects of union and intersection, the operation producing the medium from which the relands is called unisection. Okay. The synetic medium represents diffionic potential, of which the difference relationship is an actualization. Okay. So, pretty basic diagram. X differs from Y. I like to do it like a little line underneath and have like a Z. But anyways, diagram 6. This generic syndiphionic diagram illustrates a simple fact. Any difference relation requires a supporting medium with extension in the differential parameter. As illustrated, the medium distributes them both, or distributes over both the linear relation, x differs from y, and its relands, related entities, okay, x and y, bestowing on them a common relatedness property equating to inclusion in the relational medium, x to y, where x to y is the unisect or syntactic product of x and y. This common attribute invalidates any assertion to the effect that the difference between the relands is absolute or irreducible. The mere fact that the difference can be linguistically or geometrically expressed implies that it is only partial and that both relands are manifestations of one and the same ontological medium. Where x and y represent arbitrary parts or aspects of the difference relation called reality, this diagram graphically demonstrates that reality ultimately consists of a unitary ontological medium. Accordingly, reality theory must be a monic theory, reducing reality to this medium. The idea is further developed in the principle of infocognitive monism. So, yeah, that got me kind of thinking, or rather, it reminded me of two things that are less different or more similar in condition. You probably wouldn't have to go all the way down to the reality principle to have a syndiphionic medium between them. However, there's probably like an ultimate medium, I suppose. Although a medium would kind of be more like a consequence because it's not like posterior, it's just a consequence of being rooted in the same principle, or rather an observation of that. But some things that are more similar, you probably find that medium more quickly. than the ultimate reality principle, which would probably be the ultimate synthethionic principle, or medium, I suppose. Note that any syntactic, as opposed to informational, inhomogeneity is in the common medium is itself a difference relationship, and thus invites a recreation of the diagram. Similarly, any inhomogeneity in the common medium illustrated by the recreated diagram would invite yet another recreation of the diagram, and so on. And any such synthethionic regress must terminate, for if it did not, there would be no stable syntax, and therefore no relation stable enough to be perceived or conceived. The informational stability of perceptual reality shows that reality has a stable syntax. So I talk about this a little bit with in a video that I'm actually going to upload tomorrow, which you all should definitely check out. But while I'm talking about materialism therein, and like what could be offered as a relational medium, or at least an explanation for why two things can be observed in the same frame of reference, I tackle why space could not be that. And even if space were a physical thing, like a physical object, why that would then just be subject to the same scrutiny of synthethianesis, because then you'd have to relate that physical medium to a given physical object. So yeah, okay, interesting stuff. The above diagram might be compactly expressed as follows: syn x to y, diff xy. So okay, the synesis here and the diffeonesis there. Okay, cool. For example, syn nom a x. Yeah. Actually, do we have any good math people who might understand what this is trying to get at?
Malnigman.
Malnigman.
So you have the sin. You mean the sins? Sin. It's not a really math term, but I would assume it's a shorthand for synthesis of x and u, which
Oh
is
no,
the intersection,
that's
the difference.
yeah. So that's the synesis, but like, what does nom mean? Is that like a general math thing, or did I just miss that?
Well, nom. I don't really think. I'm unsure if that really matters because it's nom A and nom B. It maybe just. I'll Google it quickly, but it's. I guess it's just something to see. Norm is a function from a real or complex vector space. If it is it a nom, it's not a norm. Okay, then
Yeah,
it's
nom.
not a nom festive jam. So that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. Cool math games.
Okay.
It may just be.
I think it's just the same as this, basically.
Of...
Yeah. Okay, let's just continue. Same as this, guys. Just keep this one in mind. The only difference, this says nom A. We'll say like variable A, variable
It's like
B.
a set of laws. It's likely just a way of him to be able to differentiate, like later on, as you see. Later down, you see nom, like 1, nom 2.
Okay.
So it could simply be a way of differentiating them. Like.
Okay, interesting.
Like saying, what would it be? Like, think of some long law. Like, it could be like principle of like could it be, what's the Latin word for non-contradiction? Perhaps, I don't know. That's just an idea.
I forgore, unfortunately, but but let's just continue. Maybe it'll become more clear. I think that would make sense. Although it is interesting that it's actually X in both the synesis and the.
Oh, it's with reference to A and B. It says location from reference to A and B within the system X.
Okay,
for more sets of laws, blah blah blah.
Okay. Means that where I'm just gonna say system X or okay, A and B are sets of laws obeyed by the system X at different times, locations, or frames of reference A and B. Okay, so yeah. So this just confused me because it was saying X here twice, whereas here it's XY, but that's basically what the A and the B are supposed to be. Okay, and that's referring to the system at large. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Means that where A and B are sets of laws obeyed by the system X at different times, locations, or frames of reference A and B within the system X, there exists a more basic set of laws, A and B, A to B, in terms of which this difference may be expressed. This shows that on some level, general covariance must hold. This is not merely true up to isomorphism with X, even if more than one valid set of laws can be distinguished, any one of which might be active at any given location, A, B, etc., within X. System B, okay. Well, I'm just going to let you guys look at that. Where numerical indices denote nomological distinctness. Any distinguishable difference between these sets also requires a common syntax. Informational coherence is thus a sine qua non of recognizable existence. Any system in which it were to fail would simply decohere for lack of anything to hold it together. Okay. I think we at least have the general idea of that, especially with this. This is pretty straightforward. Okay. In other words, one, where informational distinctions regarding a system X are regarded as instantiations of law, they can also be regarded as expressions conforming to syntax. And two, the expression of differences requires a unified expressive syntax or set of laws, and this syntax must distribute over the entire set of differential expressions or instantiations of the law. Okay, so if we think of like information as a kind of self-definition, let's simplify it a little bit. Like, let's suppose a mind were creating information in the way that your imagination might. Then all of that information would basically have to cohere to the metastructure of the mind, which is its syntax, the way that it is. Okay. And then the images or the information would be essentially instantiations kind of referring to that syntax. Okay. E.g., where X is a perceptual intersect consisting of generally recognizable objects, attributes, and events, the laws of perception must ultimately be constant and distributed. Where a putative, nomological difference exists for some pair of loci, A, B. Reductive syntactic covariance applies due to the need for an expressive medium, and where no such difference exists for any pair of loci, A, B, syntactic covariance applies a fortiori with no need for reduction. Okay, so a fortiori, whoopsie, is just essentially like a stronger argument, as I understand it. So, okay. Syndiphionic relations can be regarded as elements of more complex infocognitive lattices with spatial and temporal, ordinal, or stratificative dimensions, interpreted according to CTMU duality principles. Infocognitive lattices comprise logical relationships of state and syntax. Regressing up one of these lattices by unisection ultimately leads to a syntactic medium of perfect generality and homogeneity, a universal reflexive syntactic operator. Okay. So I'm assuming that would be his global operator descriptor. Let's sit on this for a second. Infocognitive lattices. So comprised of state and syntax. So I would say that state is probably referring to an informational state, a state of information, like a condition, or maybe a set of information, and the syntax being the laws that it's according to, or the metastructure off of which another structure, the state, is built. Okay, regressing up one of these lattices by unisection. Okay. So if you have, or you can have this regression, or rather even like this lattice concept, assuming it means kind of like an ontological ladder of sorts, it seems like he's kind of referencing his particularization of tellers, which are syntactic operators. And I believe the universal one would just be what he calls the primary teller. But, okay, interesting. In effect, syndipionesis is a metalogical tautology amounting to self-resolving paradox. The paradox resides in the coincidence of sameness and difference, while a type-theoretic resolution inheres in the logical and mathematical distinction between them, i.e. the stratificative dimension of an infocognitive lattice. Thus, reducing reality to syndipionesis amounts to paradoxiforming it. This has an advantage. A theory and or reality built of self-resolving paradox is immunized to paradox. So I think that's well said, because it is kind of counterintuitive that the presence of difference could be argued for, you know, an ultimate sameness in reality, basically monism. But I think it's a very convincing argument. So far, we know that reality is a self-contained syndiphonic relation. We also have access to an instructive sort of diagram that we can use to illustrate some of the principles which follow. So let us see if we can learn more about the kind of self-contained syndiphonic relation that reality is. Quick time check. Okay, perfect. I think we're doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good here. We've been pretty slow. We're gonna keep on going. I believe this is the last part of this stage, as he put it, but hopefully we can get into, yes, the principles themselves that he mentioned. Well, these are also principles, but anyhow, okay. Yeah, okay. I had to make sure. Okay. The principle of linguistic reducibility. Reality is a self-contained form of language. This is true for at least two reasons. First, although it is in some respects material and concrete, reality conforms to the algebraic definition of a language. That is, it incorporates representations of object-like individuals, space-like relations and attributes, and time-like functions and operations. A set of expressions or perceptual states, and three, I should have been numbering these. Three, a syntax consisting of A, logical and geometric rules of structure, and B, an inductive, deductive, generative, grammar identifiable with the laws of state transition. Not exactly sure what he means by state transition, but as far as the syntax consisting of basically.
Well, if state is just like a condition, wouldn't that just be like the change in
Inductive,
condition?
deductive, generative. Okay, yeah, I guess because generative, yeah, that would make sense. That is probably correct. Okay. Representations of object-like individuals. It is kind of, yeah, definitely an interesting way to describe reality. But this first part, definitely very interesting, but also straightforward. So, second, because perception and cognition are languages, and reality is cognitive and perceptual in nature, reality is a language as well. While there have been many reductionist programs in science and philosophy, the promised reduction is always to the same thing, a theoretical language. Because this is necessarily true, language is fundamental. The fact that most such theories, e.g. theories of physics, point to the fundamental status of something objective and independent of language, e.g. matter and or energy, is quite irrelevant. For the very fact of pointing invokes an isomorphism between theory and objective reality, an isomorphism that is subject to the reality principle, and which could not exist unless reality shared the linguistic structure of the theory itself. Perhaps the meaning of this principle can be most concisely expressed through a generalization of the aphorism, whereof one cannot speak, one must be silent. who was that? It was that was Wittgenstein, right? Or I believe so. Whereof that which cannot be linguistically described, one cannot perceive or conceive. So, for the observational and theoretical purposes of science and reality theory, that which is non isomorphic to language is beyond consideration as a component of reality. This is kind of interesting regarding notions of ineffability and the idea that at the high at the highest levels of reality you can't boil it down to language, although Chris might agree with that in the sense of like a human language, but maintain that that level of reality is still linguistic in nature. But anyways, diagram 7. In this synthyphionic diagram, the assertion language differs from reality is laid out along an extended line segment representing the supposed difference between the relands. Just as in the generic diagram above, both relands possess the attribute inclusion in the relational syntactic medium, language to reality. Because they are both manifestations of the same underlying medium, their difference cannot be absolute on a fundamental level. Reality and language share common aspects. This is consistent with the nature of the difference relationship, which is actually supposed to represent a semantic and model theoretic isomorphism. So the only potential problem I could see with this is with concept reification. Because, okay, language as we have conceived it might not be what it actually is, or it might only truly exist to a certain extent, or to a certain or in a very specific way. Like language might be actually just getting at something else, or I mean, technically, in a way, in a forthright way, that's what language is. It's just expressing other things. But you know, theoretically, you could conceive of something that is, purely conceptual, and you may not have conceived of a thing correctly. And in some way, even your concept of that has to be, accounted for in the reality principle itself, but perhaps not in a direct way that reifies like a faulty conception, such that like you could theorize anything, and because you have theorized that thing, you can now synthyphionically relate it to the reality principle. In some way you can, because your potential and capacity to have formulated something like that can be related thereto, but it doesn't necessarily reify, or shouldn't reify, the concept. I could see that being a little bit of a problem with this specifically, because it assumes the concept, but I digress. As we have already seen, well, I mean, he does explain the concept well, and I agree with it, but moving on. As we have already seen, the reality principle says that reality contains all and only that which is real. As defined by this statement, the predicate reality is primarily a linguistic construct conforming to syntactic structure, where syntax consists of the rules by which predicates are constructed and interpreted. In this sense, reality amounts to a kind of theory whose axioms and rules of inference are implicitly provided by the logical component of the conceptual syntax in which it is expressed. The principle of linguistic reducibility merely clarifies the issue of whether reality is a linguistic predicate or the objective content of such a predicate by asserting that it is both. Thus, where the reality predicate is analytically or syntactically self-contained, reality is self-contained. This can be expressed as follows. On the level of cognitive perceptual syntax, reality equals reality theory. Where theory and universe converge, Occam's razor and physical principles of economy become tautologies. Okay. On the level of cognitive perceptual syntax. Okay, I think that's the key here. for as for as to why any reality theory wouldn't necessarily be reified as reality itself, save for its cognitive perceptual syntax, in which case it is indeed at least rooted in reality itself. Okay. Because perception is a sensory intersect of mind and reality, perception is impossible without cognition. And to this extent, the cognitive predicate, reality, equates to its perceptual content. On the level of cognitive and perceptual syntax, language is necessarily isomorphic to that which it describes. Okay, so a little bit clarified. Once again, to that which it describes in a perceptual reality like that which exists around us, it is tautologically true that the basic language of cognition and perception is syntactically isomorphic to reality, though illusion and falsehood become possible on the semantic level. It follows that we can speak of reality in terms of generalized cognition and perception, where this phrase denotes conformance to cognition and perception on the syntactic level. In particular, generalized cognition is that process through which reality everywhere recognizes itself. Interesting. The principle of linguistic reducibility provides a mandate to add an advanced form of language theory to the mathematical arsenal of reality theory. The reality theoretic benefits of this addition are incalculable. In conventional physical theory, the fundamental entities are point particles, waves, and more recently, strings. Each class of objects has its problems and paradoxes. In the CTMU, the fundamental objects are syntactic operators, units of self-transducing information or infocognition that are not only capable of emulating all of these objects and more, but of containing the syntactic structures to which they must inevitably conform and resolving their characteristic paradoxes in the bargain. Because meaning equates to semantic connectivity and is thus linguistic in every sense of the term, the shift to a linguistic perspective is indispensable to teleology or any other form of meaning. Now we know that reality is a linguistic, self-contained syndiphionic relation, although we still seem to be knowing it from an external vantage in a rather inspecific way. Where should we go next in search of clues? At this point, we could really use a map. Okay, so doing pretty good. We might go a little bit longer than an hour just to get through some of these. But if anybody needs to drop out for lack of time, that's totally fine, no problem. Right, syntactic closure, the metaphysical autology principle. Actually, before we do this, before we move on, because this is kind of like his phase 2 that he mentioned, does anybody have anything they want to comment on in this phase 1 with these 3 principles we just went over?
My mic working?
Yep, I heard you just now, but if you were talking before, I don't think it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I don't have anything really. I don't think that just the idea of that lattice, um, kind of climbing up to the primary reality principle, like language or symbology and geometry, or like some rendering being like mutually referential. It seemed like he was getting at something like that.
Let's see.
It's like with reference to each other all the way up until it's the same thing. And that's the resolving paradox. I'm not sure if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yeah, okay, let me just find that. Was that in Syndipionesis or was that before that? I think it was before that. No, it definitely wasn't. Or was it? Oh, there we go. Okay, so yeah, so I think as far as the self-reference, I think what he's kind of getting to is that the state is referencing the syntax. So the syntax is kind of governing the way a state can be. Okay, and to kind of explain what I think he's getting at, I'm going to use kind of my system of particularization in reality. So suppose reality, at the highest level is incredibly, well, at the very highest level is completely universal, which means that the state that it's in is the same as its syntax, right? It's not like a posterior condition that a mind thinks of. It's just the default way that reality is, which you could say, it's kind of like the theory of forms. It's like the mathematical structure or metastructure of reality would be the state, which would be the same as the syntax, like the laws governing it on that level. And say that reality had this process of, self-definition, which would be exactly the same as self-particularization, and also the same as self-pluralization, because they all imply each other. You would kind of have this procession where the state still refers to the syntax, but they're more particular and they're more discrete from one another. Whereas at that universal, perfect generality and homogeneity and universality that he's talking about here, which I believe, again, I think he's getting at God, which he actually uses as an acronym for global operator descriptor. And I believe it's the same as his primary teller. But yeah, therein state and syntax are the same. I believe that's what he's getting to. I could be wrong. I'm sure that if a CTMU fan watches this video, they'll correct a bunch of stuff, which I'm actually open to. But yeah, does that kind of answer your question, or did I miss the mark there?
No, that was definitely pretty much what I was asking. Sorry, I didn't notice my mic. I thought I interrupted you, and you guys were like moving on without me for a second, and then I'm like, oh,
No,
my
no,
mic not
no.
on.
I try not to do that. No problem. No problem.
Something I found notable, at least, is I found it a lot intuitive once you actually read it alone. At least from a math perspective, right? Because the idea that things have to, come down to a point where you can, have them together, right? Even, language has to be able to be described as because it reminds me of a very simple point. Well, no, we shall not accidentally dox myself again this time.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of a part of math where you A and the negation of A cannot be true, right? And if it does not have any unity with, the negation of A, then it's a negation, hence it can't have any unity. It's the opposite, right? And if there's some unity between the two, they can't be a negation. And then, if though that is true, then all of math is wrong. And if all of math is wrong, then you get a lot of problems.
True
so
that.
it's very intuitive in that regard.
Yeah, definitely, it flushes itself out. That's why I'm trying to. I know I'm skipping over like explaining. Well, for one, I'm not like super versed in CTMU myself, but I'm holding like a lot of conjecture until we read further, because a lot of times it does connect dots and then get those little intuitive moments.
I don't know if you're intentionally going over metalogical or not. So I don't know if that's like a word you're thinking about.
Metalogical. Oh no, I'm just
Yeah.
no, that's actually just me stimming. No, that's funny. I think if you ever write, you should just throw the word meta before words. But I'm guessing a meta logic must be like a logic for logic. So
it's like like it's beyond logic. It's like a principle which defines it, so to speak.
Right. All right.
Like the principle of non-contradiction, for example.
Right. Yeah. So anything else real quick in this phase, as it were? All right, that's perfectly fine. Let's continue on. Let's see. Okay. Syntactic closure, the metaphysical ontology principle. All relations, mappings, and functions relevant to reality in a generalized affective sense, whether descriptive, definitive, compositional, attributive, nomological, or interpretive, are to be generated, defined, parameterized within reality itself. In other words, reality comprises a closed descriptive manifold from which no essential predicate is omitted, and which thus contains no critical gap that leaves any essential aspect of structure unexplained. Any such gap would imply non-closure. Okay. Diagram 8. Okay. How how reality defines itself. How, let me adjust my mic a little bit. Okay. How science explains itself intrinsically. Let's go ahead. I think it's just the same thing. Okay. I was thinking the words might be different. Oh no, defined in terms of, explained in terms of. Okay.
Yeah, there.
Almost didn't pick up on that. Whoopsie. Okay, so self-definition. All right. MAP, a theoretical refinement of the self-containment criterion set forth by the reality principle, extends the closure property of the definition of reality to the set of all real predicates. MAP affects closure on the definitive, descriptive, explanatory, and interpretive levels of reality theory by making it take the form of a closed network of coupled definitions, descriptions, explanations, and interpretations to refer to nothing external to reality itself. Another way to state this is that MAP, like the reality principle, requires that everything to which any reality theoretic definition, description, explanation, or interpretation refers be located within reality. Okay. This has the effect of making reality responsible for its own structure and evolution in the abstract and concrete senses. MAP requires a closed form explanation on the grounds that distinguishability is impossible without it. Again, this comes down to the issue of syntactic stability. To state it in as simple a way as possible, reality must ultimately possess a stable two-valued object-level distinction between that which it is and that which it is not. Okay, reality must possess a stable distinction between that which it is and that which it is not, maintaining the necessary informational boundaries between objects, attributes, and events. So I did double take because I almost thought that was saying it must contain what it isn't, but rather the distinction between what it is and it isn't. Okay. The existence of closed informational boundaries within a system is ultimately possible only by virtue of systemic closure under dualistic explanans explanandum composition, which is just how it is affected in sentential logic. Okay. As an example of the tautological structure of MAP, consider a hypothetical external scale of distance or duration in terms of which the absolute size or duration of the universe or its contents can be defined. Due to the analytic self-containment of reality, the functions and definitions comprising its self-descriptive manifold refer only to each other. Anything not implicated in its syntactic network is relevant to structure and internally unrecognizable, while anything which is relevant is already an implicit ingredient of the network and need not be imported from outside. This implies that if the proposed scale is relevant, then it is not really external to reality. In fact, reality already contains it as an implication of its intrinsic structure. Okay. In other words, because reality is defined on the mutual relevance of its essential parts and aspects, external and irrelevant are synonymous. If something is external to reality, then it is not included in the syntax of reality and is thus internally unrecognizable. It follows that with respect to the level of reality defined on relevance and recognition, there is no such thing as a real but external scale. And thus, that the universe is externally undefined with respect to all measures, including overall size and duration. If an absolute scale were to ever be internally recognizable as an ontological necessity, then this would simply imply the existence of a deeper level of reality to which the scale is intrinsic and by which it is itself intrinsically explained as a relative function of other ingredients. Thus, if the need for an absolute scale were to ever become recognizable within reality, that is, recognizable to reality itself, it would by definition be relative in the sense that it could be defined and explained in terms of other ingredients of reality. In this sense, MAP is a general principle of relativity. Interesting. So you almost get something in favor of a little bit of ineffability, in that if something is, or at that absolute scale, is internally recognizable, it implies that you haven't actually reached the absolute scale, which is kind of apophotic, or it reads apophotic to me. But likewise, that because reality is, I guess, immanent at all scales, it would be, not in the absolute sense, but recognizable and coherent at every scale is the idea I'm getting. So, the no-gaps criterion of MAP permits no critical explanatory holes, omitting any essential aspect of structure. What this means can best be illustrated by means of a recurrent fallacy. The existence of the universe is given, and therefore in no need of explanation. The phrase "is given" is incomplete. It has hidden loose ends corresponding to that by which existence is given, the means by which it is given, and the reason for which it is given. If the source, means, and reason are actually real, then they are inside reality, and the explanatory gap exists only in the mind of the claimant, rather than in the self-explanatory network of reality itself. Okay, so... Okay. On the other hand, omitting this phrase, "is given," results in something like, "the existence of the universe is inexplicable." However, this amounts to the assertion that the universe has no identifiable basis or medium of existence, not even itself, i.e., that no explanatory function can be defined on the explanandum, and that the universe is somehow prohibited from serving as its own source, means, or reason. But this amounts to saying that the universe can only exist by magic, popping out of the apeiron with a spontaneity exceeding that by which a genuine magician might pull a magic rabbit out of a hat. For whereas magic rabbits can at least be said to be, or to originate by magic associated with magicians who pull them out of top hats into the bright light of reality, or to magically bootstrap themselves out of their own hats into their own realities, the universe would be denied any ontological basis or medium whatsoever, even a bootstrap. Because questions like why and how does reality exist within the domain of existential potential, supporting the possibility of existence. Why and how does reality exist? Okay. And why does this reality exist instead of some other reality, address the ontological and teleological levels of the structure of reality. And because these levels of structure are logically meaningful, they must have answers. Even if those answers are determined, as some of them are, by the closure criterion itself. Or let's see, let me reread that. Adjust the ontological and teleological levels of reality or structure, and because these levels of structure are logically meaningful, they must have answers. Okay. So I'm not sure if he's going to continue with that or if he's using the closure criterion itself as the answer. think it would be an answer, but anyways. Now we know that the closed single predicate definition of the reality principle is actually a closed descriptive manifold of linked definitions in principle containing the means of its own composition, attribution, recognition, processing, and interpretation, but this is still somewhat automatonic. What about mind? Since it is through our minds that we understand anything at all, understanding remains incomplete until we observe more about the relationship between mind and reality. So, having equipped ourselves with a map, we now attend to the correspondence between the map and the terrain. I will be right back. 2 seconds. It's getting hot in my room. All right. So I don't know. This section kind of threw me around a little bit. Not gonna lie. Although the essence of it seems fairly forthright. Like, essentially, reality is self-contained.
I would compare the experience a bit like a more understandable version of the Parmenides, which I just remember throwing me around a lot when I forced myself to read it all in one go.
Is the Parmenides kind of similar to this?
Yeah, well, it's very metaphysical, and it's very you feel very brain drained once you begin reading very quickly.
Yeah. That's probably one of the benefits of a lot of the other times we did this. We only did like 5 pages. We'll keep going because I do want to make a good dent, but you can kind of
Yeah, we
digest
nearly made 10
information.
pages.
Did we start at page 12 or
12.
14?
I think it's 14, so we could aim. Well, not. Is it
We're,
14 really? Let's see. It might be 13.
yeah,
Thus
we're
far, that's where
close.
we
We're
started.
close. So
So we can aim for like 11 or 10.
let's. Oh wow, this section's kind of small. Let me see how. All right, this is also kind of small. I guess let's see how quick this goes. Well, that's really just like 3 pages, but most of that's a diagram.
Yeah, but 3 pages can be a lot in the CTMU.
That's true. That's true. Let's just see how this goes, and then I'll decide whether that other short principle. This one seemed to be the longer one. Let's find out. Okay. So syntactic comprehensivity, reflexivity. Yeah, there's a lot. Even even in like the titles. The mind equals reality principle. Although this one should shed some light on exactly what he means by that. Whether mind just has to be accounted by the reality principle or accounted for by the reality principle, in that reality must be mentalizing, or that mind is literally reality. Although it seems like he might actually just assert that, which I'm all for. But let's see. The M equals R, or mind equals reality principle, asserts that mind and reality are ultimately inseparable to the extent that they share common rules of structure and processing. The existence of a difference relation between mind and reality syndifyonically presupposes a relational medium having the characteristics of both, and this medium has logical priority over the difference relation itself. Okay, so yes, kind of this. Kind of what was just said. So a syndifyonic diagram, just such a great. Although I think you could like relay. You couldn't arm concept reification against syndifyonesis. I think I don't think you could, but you could against one of the relans that the term he uses, one of the variables. But I think doing that for mind, some people have done it, but it's kind of silly. It's always very, very silly. But anyways, diagram 9, M equals R, mind equals reality principle. In the above syndifyonic diagram, mind is juxtaposed with a reality in a space bounded by a box. The line separating mind and reality represents the supposed difference between them, while the interior of the box represents their comparability or relatedness, or more technically, their uniform differentiating syntax or unisect, denoted by means of the curvy line functor. The extensionality of the line is just that of the box. Without the box, there would be no extensional medium to contain the line and no way to express the associated difference relation. Because the separation cannot exist without a common medium incorporating a differentiative syntax that models over both relands of the difference relation, the absolute separation of mind and reality has no model, and without a model, the premise of Cartesian mind-matter dualism fails. This indicates that reality and mind, information and information processor, must ultimately be regarded as one. Any Cartesian-style distinction between them must be strictly qualified. What is, well, always, I believe, Mal, you might have brought it up actually, how theism with some kind of like dualism or materialism is very odd. I believe you did. And dualism, especially, I believe Descartes was a Christian. And if you have, I mean, you don't have to necessarily equate God with mind at all, but if you have like these two irreconcilable principles, that likewise seems very, very odd with theism. Uh, but yeah, it is has always struck me as odd to have like something fundamentally external to another thing. But yeah, continuing on, the M equals R principle is merely a logical version of what empiricist philosophers long ago pointed out. We experience reality in the form of perceptions and sense data from which the existence and independence of mind and objective external reality are induced. Since any proof to the contrary would necessarily be cognitive, as are all proofs, and since the content of cognition is cognitive by embedment, no such proof can exist. Such a proof would undermine its own medium and thereby cancel itself. On the other hand, the reality principle says that reality is self-contained with respect to recognition and control, and to the extent that recognition and control are mental in the sense of being affected according to cognitive and perceptual syntax, so is reality. The M equals R principle entails comprehensivity by defining all of our perceptions along with their syntax level cognitive syntactic infrastructure. Sometimes you get a couple mouthfuls reading the CTMU. As parts of reality, regardless of decidability. When it comes to M equals R, it is hard to resist a little play on words. M equals R says that the syntactic levels of cognition and perception. M equals R says that at the syntactic level of cognition and perception, the map is the terrain. Okay. That makes sense. So the map is actually what it's mapping according to this. So, interesting. And the map would be the mind, the terrain. And of course, he's getting at the metaphysical ontology principle. Yeah, okay. I got it. It'd be really funny if I didn't get it, though. Not that M equals R goes beyond the mere Kantian isomorphism between phenomenal reality and the categories of thought and perception. It says that syntax and its content are recursively related, and in conjunction with the reality principle, that any supposed content not related to the rules of structure and evolution of reality is irrelevant. Although this is a trivial observation insofar as unrelated and irrelevant are synonymous, it seems to have been largely ignored by many who should have known better. Okay. To put it another way, if the noumenal, perceptually independent part of reality were truly unrelated to the phenomenal, cognition isomorphic part, then these two halves of reality would neither be coincident nor share a joint medium relating them. In that case, they would simply fall apart, and any integrated reality supposedly containing both of them would fail for lack of an integrated model, where M, mind, is identified with cognition, and R, reality, with physically embodied information. M equals R says that reality everywhere consists of a common substance, infocognition, having the dual nature of mind and informational reality. Okay. Very interesting. So this actually kind of reminds me of a problem I had with Kant, which is, okay, so basically the idea here with Kant is that he basically renders perception and cognition as subject to doubt, as in you may not actually be perceiving the world as it actually is. This is the most forthright example, at least, because it's filtered through your subjectivity. But if there is no, it seems to presuppose like an ontological gap between the subject and the object, which would somehow permutate the object in itself to the subject. But if there is no such gap, then that lack of isomorphism between the subject and the object, to that extent, to the extent of cognizing the object or perceiving it, wouldn't be a problem. But all right, continue there. The M equals R property takes up where the principle of linguistic reducibility leaves off in eliminating the distinction between theory and universe. By its light, the theoretical description of reality by human beings contained in reality amounts to reality describing itself. Bearing in mind that a theory is a mental construct, this can be illustrated by simply replacing mind and reality in the above diagram by theory and universe, and mind to reality by theory to universe.